understand, what the enjoyment that you get from sailing in these wonderful waters. I'm here tonight to say a few words about Johnnie Walker Blue Label. Now, Johnnie Walker Blue Label is a blended whiskey. It's a blended Scotch whiskey. And a lot of people say, well, a blended whiskey is not as good as a single malt. You've heard that before? Don't believe it.
Are you sure?
I'm sure. I spent 30 of my 40 years making malt whiskies. And the truth of the matter is that each is as good as the other. They're just different. And if you get a really good blended whiskey, believe me, there's a lot more complex flavors to be found than in any one single malt whiskey. Johnnie Walker, he was a real man, by the way. He was born in 1805, and when he was only 15, following the death of his father, he was set up to manage an existing grocer's shop in the nearby town of Kilmarnock. Now, Kilmarnock is right down in the southwest of Scotland, southwest of Glasgow. And grocers in those days were very, very much used to blending tea. Why do we blend tea? Flavour. To create different flavours to appeal to different palates. And I have to say this, in those days the distillers weren't making really very good whiskies. They didn't have the skills to make the good whiskey. And so the flavours of the whiskies, they really were all over the place. And there was no consistency of flavour. And this was the driver, if you like, for people like John Walker, grocers, to start playing around and mixing whiskies together to see what would happen to the flavour. Well, the flavour improved. And they found that they could also influence the flavour of the whiskey. How could they do that? By choosing different single malts with distinctly different flavours. You get very light whiskies with sort of fresh fruit characters. The opposite end of the scale are the very, very heavy whiskies from the Western Isles. The very heavy, peaty, smoky whiskies. And you've got all the flavours in between. So this is why blending started. We don't know much about John, but the one thing we do know is that he liked to use these smoky whiskies. So his original blend obviously had a smoky flavour. That's important, because that smoky flavour is the DNA, if you like, of a present-day Johnnie Walker whiskey. We would never create a Johnnie Walker blend without it having some smokiness to the flavour. But it wasn't really John that built up the business. It was his son Alexander who took over on his father's death in 1857, and he was determined to grow the business, to start exporting, and 10 years later, in 1867, he introduced his own blend, which he had developed from the recipe of his father's original blend. On introduction, he also created the now very familiar slanting label. So this style of label dates back to 1867, and the original one was black and gold. He was very successful in getting his product into the markets, and he began to win awards for quality. The first award he won was in 1879 in Sydney, Australia. And Walkers have been winning quality awards ever since. He died in 1889, passing the business on to his two sons, another Alexander and his older brother George. And together, these two guys, well, they took over the business when blended whiskies had really started to flourish. They were really becoming very, very popular. And to ensure consistency of quality, they actually purchased Cardew Distillery, where I'm based at the moment. And the idea was to ensure supplies of a high-quality single malt whisky. They also were very clever because they realized that people were beginning to look for a lighter style of whisky. And of course, we were lucky at the time, at the expense of the French, it has to be said, when the phylloxera problem hit the brandy industry. And of course, the English were very fond of their brandy diluted with soda. So the Walkers created a newer whisky, a lighter whisky, but very full of flavour. And they launched this in 1909, and they called it Red Label. They also took their father's whisky and redeveloped it and relaunched it the same year as Black Label. Whiskies which are full of flavours. Now, George and Alexander were the last two Walker family members to work in the business. Sir Alexander retired in 1940, but they left a very, very rich legacy. And by the 1990s, we have built up within our company a tremendous stock of Scotch whiskies. At the moment in Scotland, the Walker blenders have access to around about 7 million casks of whisky. Think about that. 7 million casks of whisky. So we have the biggest choice in the world of flavours in Scotch whisky. And I notice you're being served with Blue Label and with iced water. And I'm now going to tell you a little bit about this whisky because it is really rather special. And I implore you not to taste the whisky until I describe how best to enjoy it. It's a blend. So it's a mixture of around about 15 or so whiskies. Malt whiskies and also some lighter grain whiskies. Some of the whiskies are extremely old, but not all of them. Each of the whiskies is very rare. We more or less hand select the whiskies for this blend. Because nature, the whole world of whiskey, even producing the whiskey and certainly maturing the whiskey, we are working alongside with nature. And sometimes nature takes control and provides us with whiskies which are absolutely superb. And these are the whiskies that we keep aside to create Blue Label. They don't often appear, so don't get the impression that we have warehouses full of these rare whiskies. We certainly don't. But the flavours that they give out are just so very, very special, very rich. The older whiskies especially become a little bit fragile, so we don't like adding water to Blue Label. And that's why tonight you're being served with the Blue Label in a brandy glass, and alongside it, a glass of cold water. Now, the technique to enjoy this whisky is to take 3 or 4 sips of the cold water. Not 1, but 3 at least. To get your mouth nice and clean, but importantly, to get your mouth really, really cold. The Blue Label being served in a brandy goblet, it's an ideal glass because, like a cognac, it's allowing quite a large surface area to allow the aromas to escape. And then they become concentrated at the neck so that when you nose the whisky, you can pick up the very, very rich aromas.
Is it an appetizer?
Sorry?
Is it an appetizer?
No, it is not an appetizer. Ideally, we should be doing this presentation after dinner. It's very much an after-dinner style of whiskey. That's a good question, actually. The reason we do the presentation at the beginning is to give you the full benefit of the flavours, because following a meal accompanied by wine, because your taste buds are affected. So actually doing this before dinner is better to give you the full appreciation of the whiskey. So have we all got some Blue Label? I think what we should do is just take some water to cool the palate. And only then take a sip of blue. Hold it in the mouth, roll it round your mouth, and then let it trickle gently over your throat. Now if you get your mouth really cold, there will be no burns, because neat whiskey is not very pleasant. I don't like neat whiskey. But if you get your mouth really cold, you will find that the whiskey doesn't burn. And then as you wait, the flavour builds up. So just try it. Does it work? The other thing you might notice after you swallow the whiskey is the fact that you get a lovely velvet sort of feel on the palate. This is coming from the very old whiskies in the blend. So you're getting this very rich flavour and very, very rich mouthfeel. And to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the birth of John Walker, thank you. To celebrate the 200th anniversary of the birth of John Walker, we created a special edition of Blue Label called Johnnie Walker Blue Label Anniversary Pack. It's the same whiskey, but it's at cask strength. It's at normal strength. We haven't reduced the strength down to 40. So the alcohol content is much stronger. Only 2,000 of these bottles were produced, and the whiskey was filled into a Baccarat crystal decanter. And I believe if anyone's interested in this particular pack, then it is here in the York Club. Thank you so much for your patience. I realise that you've been waiting here this evening. I hope you enjoy your dinner and enjoy the evening. And thank you very much for allowing me to come and say these words to you tonight. Thank you.